mindfulness is just one of the many ways that we can improve our mental health. And I wondered, have you had any ideas of other ways of improving mental health which you think needs to be better enabled by technology?
Mhm. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, mindfulness and specifically mindfulness meditation is one tool in the toolkit. It's a super powerful one. It's wonderful, but just one tool. I think this won't be anything that no one has said before, but I really do think that relational health and connection, particularly being able to have deep, intimate connection in a relationship with the people in our lives, just can't be overstated in terms of how important that is. When we break apart and look at lots of different evidence-based approaches to mental health treatment, for example, there's going to be some element in there about your interpersonal relationships and how you are able to connect and feel belonging.
Welcome to the MindTech podcast, where we dive deep into the unsolved problems in mental health with the founders, investors, and experts building technology to solve them. Today, we have a very special guest whose wisdom and insights are just as impressive as the roles that she has held in our niche of MindTech. Clare Purvis is a Stanford-trained clinical psychologist who has applied her understanding of the mind to building digital mental health interventions all throughout her career, including as the former vice president of clinical product and content development at Headspace, now valued at over $3 billion US and making around $200 million per year. Claire has also been the clinical product lead in the Mental Health Center of Excellence at Google, head of clinical product at Lantern, the chief product officer at Mindcure, and the founder of Well, a business leadership community for women, clinicians, and scientists in digital health, which our female listeners can check out in the description. So, what an honor it is to be speaking with you today, Claire. I am beyond excited to explore some of the most interesting insights from your work and see where our curiosity takes us today.
Well, likewise, I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely wonderful to have you on as well. Okay, so let's dive into maybe the why behind this whole journey of yours, what started it. So, what first inspired you to train as a psychologist in the first place and wanting to make an impact in mental health?
Mm. I I was a psychology major in undergrad, but I never at that time had any aspiration to continue on to graduate school and become a clinical psychologist. I kind of stumbled into a job after undergrad in a community mental health center in a rural county in Colorado in the US. And initially, when I took that position, I truly thought I was just finding a way to spend some time before I would depart for the Peace Corps, which I'd been accepted into at the end of undergrad, but we had budget cuts at that time, and all of our acceptances for that year were deferred for 2 full years before we could leave at the Peace Corps. And for me personally, when I was 22 years old, 2 years felt like an eternity. I couldn't process that amount of time. I thought, well, I have to find something to do to use my degree while I wait for this unbelievably long amount of time of 2 years. And I ended up at a community mental health center in a rural area in Colorado. And it was really during my time working there that I started to really shift my perspective. I had been very interested, certainly, as evidenced by wanting to be part of the Peace Corps. I was really interested in global systems, global issues, global politics, and working more on the ground with individual families and people in my role at that mental health center. I started to really feel pulled to having that ability to impact on an individual level where you really see change happen. I found that much more motivating and inspiring than I suppose I ever realized it would be, not having had that experience before. And while working there, I had the chance to train or apprentice, if you will, with a clinical psychologist who was working in that center. And he really encouraged me to think about, pursuing this as a career, and said, if I was interested in continuing to work in the mental health sphere and kind of have this sort of impact, he really helped me to recognize that it would be beneficial for me to pursue the most advanced training that I could so that I could understand um, psychology and mental health intervention at the highest level that, that was appealing to me that I could. And so I started applying to doctoral programs. Um, and I suppose as they say, Bob's your uncle. I was admitted to a program and I went on that trajectory, and I kind of never looked back to the other path, but it's taken me to this very unexpected career, that I have now. So really
Wonderful.
it was for me that ability to really connect individually and on a personal level with our clients in doing this work and be able to see change happen, I think was really magical to me. It was something that that's continued to motivate me even in the type of work that I do now.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how the circumstances that we stumble into and didn't necessarily plan so far in advance happen to be the ones that can be the most transformative. It's crazy how that
Mm-hmm.
works, and it's
Yeah.
really cool how that rings true in your story. Um, leading all the way to being such a leading driving force in a company like Headspace, which took the world by storm, um, and making such an impact in mindfulness and really bringing that to the masses. And
Mm-hmm.
I find it really interesting because one of the most powerful effects of a mindfulness app like Headspace is that the product can serve as both a painkiller to relieve any acute stress or anxiety, as well as a vitamin, building that mindfulness muscle to protect the user's mental health going forwards. But
Mm-hmm.
it must have been quite a challenging task to embed these two quite different effects within the same user experience, making sure that the onboarding doesn't require a lot of effort from the user so they can get that relief in as frictionless a way as possible, while also sustaining their engagement for the long term. And I guess that begs the question, what product decisions did you have to make to achieve this balance between a painkiller and a vitamin?
Mm. So many. That's a metaphor that we used internally as well. Actually, the painkiller and the vitamin. Um, there's so many decisions, right? I think that you're constantly navigating and constantly reevaluating and iterating on in any sort of product development environment, particularly at scale. Um, the way that I think about it and always encouraged our teams to think about the user experience digitally does have kind of analogy to an in-person interaction in therapy or with a psychologist. So the vast majority of people coming to Headspace are coming in a state of some sort of acute need. Um, maybe they're feeling stressed, maybe they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling some sort of distressing emotion that they want help with. So our duty is to understand what it is that they're coming to us for help with, and if it's within our area of expertise, if it's within the realm of things that we can help with, Headspace being a consumer product, not a clinical product, not meant to treat anything in particular, our duty is to provide value, to provide the user with an experience that shows, yes, there is hope. We can help you with this, and you can feel some relief from that experience. Now, the trick with that is that, particularly from a mindfulness based perspective, in the long term, we're not in the business of distracting, alleviating, getting rid of bad feelings as a way of making it through life, right? So then we reach these really interesting decision points around how do we find the balance? How do we provide you as early as possible in your experience in this product with a feeling that you can do this, it can help you, you can get a positive sort of outcome of this practice, and not lean so heavily into that we're saying like, yeah, come to Headspace, we'll erase all of your worries, we'll make everything great. The whole goal is to not feel a certain kind of way, because that's not the point of mindfulness, right? The point is to be able to show up to our experience fully and allow our experience to be there, whatever it may be, and to be able to um, detach from suffering in that moment, right? To some extent. And the analogy I was talking about with therapy is sort of similar, right? If someone comes to me um, in the therapy context, and let's say they're feeling extremely stressed, extremely anxious, really in a lot of distress. If I spend that whole first session kind of talking about long-term goals, how things are, what we're going to work on over time, all the different sort of work that they're going to do over the course of our therapy together to help get that outcome, um, they're probably not going to they're not going to be super motivated to come back to me, right? Because they spent that whole session really anxious and hearing about all the work that they're going to have to do for that to change. So what I want to be able to do is create an environment in that room in their first session where maybe we can help them reduce that anxiety a little bit in the moment. Maybe we can give them a little sliver, a little glimpse of hope that this process that we're going to go through together is going to help you to achieve the goal that you have. It's in service of you. So it's kind of the same challenge that we face in face to face, right? That I got to give you value. I got to give you something that shows you this could be helpful to you. And I have to do that in a way that's towing that line that says hope is here, help is here. There are things you can do that will help you. We can show you how to do that, and not sort of feed you a story or feed you an unrealistic picture that yeah, we can just like get rid of all your stress and get rid of all the bad feelings, and that's the goal that we're here to work on together. But we have to roll that out in a gradual, sort of consumable way that's not too much all at once. So kind of a long answer to your question, but we tried all kinds of things product wise, right? Some
Mm.
product decisions early on. We looked for, if you're coming into Headspace and the only thing we give you early on in your experience is a meditation where you close your eyes for 10 minutes. For some people, that's a really short amount of time, right? If you're an experienced meditator, we think 10 minutes is really accessible and really short. If you're coming in with zero meditation experience and kind of a lot of stress and anxiety that you'd like some help with, what we learned from our user research is eyes closed for 10 minutes is probably not a very accessible place for everybody to start. So we started to build in moments of delight into the product, things like an eyes open, animated breathing exercise. Experiences that you could be guided through in the product that similarly either use your breath or your concentration to help you to feel a little bit of relief right now, right? So we're kind of trying to show you early in the experience there's something accessible here. There's something that feels comfortable and safe for you to do that can give you just a little bit of a feeling that this could be helpful for me. Pain reliever, right? As early as possible. Meeting people where they are. Most people come into the experience looking for the pain relief, not looking for the vitamin. So we want to provide that to you in a way that's ethical and meets your needs. And then we want to slowly show you that there's a vitamin path here too. There's a program you could follow. There's a pathway that we've built for helping you sleep better, for reducing your stress, for helping you to move your body in ways that feel good, right? Depending on what it is that resonates with you. We're building out these options and to kind of trying to gently point you in that direction to say, here's something that you could practice consistently, develop a bit more of a habit, develop a bit more of a routine around it. It's going to help you get to that goal that you told us was so important when you first joined. So we're earning your trust early on. We're earning the right to give you that recommendation. And then we're laying out a path as an option. And you always, as the user, have the choice. Do I want to pursue that, or do I want to do something different?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a massive ethical responsibility for any of these interventions, right? To solve that immediate problem that they're coming for, but then also giving a path to working through the issue, because otherwise it's just going to keep happening. And
Yeah.
knowing where you can draw the line there with something digital is quite tough, really. So the recent merger with Ginger and now being able to provide even more professional services is a great way to offer even more solid options long term as well to some of the users. It's also interesting because with any mental health app, the more information you have about the user, the more personalized and appropriate your content can be for them, especially long term, right? And being
Hmm.
faced with an intense onboarding questionnaire as soon as you download the app can be a huge turnoff, which is something that Headspace seem to be very intentional about not doing. So, what have you found to be the best approach at being able to draw out this kind of information that you want from users to provide that personalized and appropriate content, but in a more gradual and natural way?
Mm. Well, I think things like onboarding experiences in a digital app are always going to be a focus of product development. It's such an important, it, I particularly feel strongly about this, that the onboarding experience is enormously important for setting up everything else that we do, right? So we never think about like a set it and forget it on an onboarding experience. We're always going back to look at how users are progressing through that. Where are we seeing drop off? What kind of feedback do we get? Is it working? Is that onboarding experience leading people into first time use or first week use or even first 30-day experiences that are predicting retention? Are we seeing good, we're seeing good outcomes? So we're always looking at that, right? For one thing. And then I think there's always some healthy debate in a product team about which things are problems and which things should be changed. And we try to be as data driven as possible about that. But philosophically, I think as far as getting information that's needed about users, I think myself and any good product person will tell you it's get something, give something. So it's always immediate value provided back to the user for any piece of information that we ask for. The reason why we're asking for it should be clear. You should know what you're getting into, why we're asking for information, and why it's going to be helpful to you. And every time you provide one more piece of data, we should be able to show you in the experience how that's helped us. For example, power your recommendations, something that we recommend on the basis of that information that you gave us. Each step along the way, right? We're getting something and giving something. And oftentimes, particularly in health and wellness applications, there is quite a bit of, no, it's not limitless, but there is quite a bit of patience and understanding from the user that um, you're trying to craft an experience that will help them with what they're here for, with what matters to them. And there can be actually a higher degree of willingness from users to provide more information or to stick with an onboarding experience a bit longer, particularly if we're always following that give and get rule. So we were able to push, we thought about this in different ways, at least at that company. Our initial onboarding, you're right, we try to keep that bar low. There were certain experiences that could be accessed once you're within the application that might be, for example, a guided program for stress, or that might be related to post-merger seeking coaching or seeking therapy. There's going to be a onboarding, so to speak, experience into that new program as well. So by that time, we know a bit about you as a user. We've built up trust with you. You've decided you want to go a little bit deeper. And that's where we see pretty high, you're going to see a fairly high willingness on the part of the user to provide the information that's required to make sure that they get the most out of that experience. But the same principles apply, right? Really clarifying and setting expectations around, why do we need this information from you? Is it a preference that you have that's going to give us set some parameters on the type of content that we recommend, for example, or help us pick the right, a lot of mental health apps will do this, like help pick the right provider for you, that kind of thing. Providing that framing and value back to the user, and then being sure that we're showing at each step along the way how the additional information they share is actually improving the outcome that they're going to get. Those are some of the key principles about how I think about those experiences.
That is, yeah, totally clear. The importance of transparency and the giving as well as getting, and having that very closely tied, very practical there. I think also helping people continuously connect and reconnect with their motivators for behavior change, right? Clarifying their attention for being there, what matters to them, the value that's bringing them back to the app every time, or product. and really framing their reason for being there as not just an outcome like to relieve stress, but instead framing it in terms of their intention and values can not only improve their satisfaction and engagement, but it really helps people think of their practice there as a sort of lifelong improvement and pursuit rather than just a quick fix.
Hmm. Yeah, I think people, a lot of different apps, especially in the health and wellness space, have different features or ways of thinking about how do we gather from the user what's your reason for being here, what's your big why, what's your goal, and we'll have different time frames on those things as well. I think it's interesting. It's been interesting in my work to see how that can vary across different populations. Um, for example, in a recent project, we were working with folks with type 2 diabetes. And these were folks who were relatively ill, had fairly complex disease complications, had been kind of dealing with this illness for some time. And as a psychologist who's also spent a lot of time in mindfulness-based approaches, my initial bias was, well, of course, for this group, like any other, we really want to think about those big life values, those big future whys that are going to motivate them, that are going to be their reason for wanting to engage in these like huge lifestyle changes that ultimately end up being what's recommended for managing type 2 diabetes. And early on in our initial user research to inform our design of our kind of initial product offering, we found out from this population that that was an absolute non-starter for most of these folks. The idea of thinking far ahead into the future, of thinking aspirationally in terms of their values and goals, was overwhelming. It was undesirable. It felt out of touch to a lot of them. And where they pointed us in our research was what can I do today? What can I do this week? No later than this week. Like help me just focus on what needs to happen right now and what needs to happen next. And I don't necessarily want to see that in the container or the context of this really this really big juicy kind of life value that I have. Now, with my psychologist hat on, I'm kind of curious there. Like, I wonder if there's a point in the experience where it would feel more the right time to start to bring in some of that bigger goal setting, values exploration, some of that, those, I suppose, loftier, if you will, motivations for behavior change, if that might be better for this particular population a little bit later in the experience when we've earned some trust, when we've helped them achieve some wins, when we've helped build up some momentum and some motivation. Maybe we try something like that a bit later. We haven't explored that yet in our research, but to me that was really interesting to think about. We all need some help with motivation. That's a part of behavior change. We need to stay connected to some intention or reason behind our making all these changes that are super hard, right? But that looks really different for different people, for different populations, for different types of problems. And being able to be flexible and responsive to that in designing behavior change products is, I think, what keeps the work interesting, right? It's like, yes, it's similar themes and similar types of things that we're designing in all these different contexts, but um, the how you do it and the detail in it is really different. We've got to be always really willing to listen to our users to see what the right way is to do it in a particular context. For me, if we had trusted my gut and said like, oh, well, she's the psychologist, she's built these products before, we'll just, do it the way she thinks it should be done. I think we would have lost a lot of users at least in our early product launches, who just didn't resonate with that way of thinking about intention and motivation for behavior change. So for me, I find that super energizing to see,
Yeah.
I'm trying things different ways with different populations and different products, which is really fun.
Yeah, that is fascinating how you, because a huge part of your role is to do this deep user research to understand their needs and validate the problems and solutions that you're building. And it's just fascinating how this insight has totally changed the product, and it had huge implications
Hmm.
there. And really, that outcome being there's a time and place for those more deeper questions about what are your intentions, what are your values, and they may come once you've once you've already made quite a lot of progress in the health journey that you're on with us on this platform. So yeah, really cool insight there from the user research that you guys did. Just to kind of close up on the whole period with Headspace and the mindfulness era, making such a huge impact in making mindfulness more accessible and helping people really bring their awareness to the present moment without judgment, without distraction, is so key to living a more peaceful and compassionate life, so important to improving mental health. But as you know very well, mindfulness is just one of the many ways that we can improve our mental health. And I wondered, have you had any ideas of other ways of improving mental health which you think needs to be better enabled by technology?
Mhm. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, mindfulness and specifically mindfulness meditation is one tool in the toolkit. It's a super powerful one. It's wonderful, but just one tool. I think this won't be anything that no one has said before, but I really do think that relational health and connection, particularly being able to have deep, intimate connection in a relationship with the people in our lives, just can't be overstated in terms of how important that is. When we break apart and look at lots of different evidence-based approaches to mental health treatment, for example, there's going to be some element in there about your interpersonal relationships and how you are able to connect and feel belonging and um, feel intimacy and and safety in those relationships. Right, it's super important for so many. So I think that there's starting to be kind of a growing interest in some people talk about it as combating loneliness. Others talk about it more specifically as kind of building healthy relationships or building relational health. I think that's a really critical place for us to focus going forward, particularly when we think about kind of the general experience of mental health. Maybe separating that or thinking about that uh, in partnership or alongside mental health disorders, which are, they're kind of their own thing. When we think about everyone's experience of mental health, we all have mental health, and that mental health can be very high or it can be lower. Um, the quality of our relationships and the extent to which we feel connected and belonging in those relationships in our communities with the people around us in our lives is an enormous predictor of of our experience of mental health. And we could pontificate about, are we more connected? Are we less connected in this digital age? Da, da, da. I think um, we know that people are craving, always have, always will, like crave connection, crave belonging. And so when we think about general approaches to how we promote and optimize and improve all of our experience in mental health, that's, I think, got to be a huge area of focus. And there are some great, even in the private sector, some companies approaching this. There's organizations, communities, people talking about this in their lives. I think is super energizing and exciting. But it's certainly an area where we're a little bit later to the game. If we think about the digital mental health world, we've been very individually focused for most of this first generation of digital mental health innovation. We've been very focused on skill building, CBT-based interventions. Those things are great. They're powerful, they're effective. But I think as we think about leveling up, expanding access, rolling out solutions that are going to be helpful for even broader swaths of people, we've got to think about relationship and connection and belonging and intimacy.
100%. Yeah. Social connection is hugely important and not a very well delivered means to improving mental health digitally right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, within these social systems that could be created, people could have more collective outcomes, a more collective approach to mental health, and therefore a more collective impact, which is a very exciting prospect. You mentioned there are a couple of teams in the private space and communities doing some great things. Um, would you be able to shine some light on what they might be working on, and if you yourself have had any ideas about how social connection can be better enabled with technology to improve mental health?
Yeah, there's one company in particular that comes to mind that has kind of a unique take on this. So There's a company called Mino that's founded by another Headspace alum, one of our absolute rock stars, Renata Nyborg, who went from Headspace to Tinder, where she was CEO of Tinder. And she's developed Mino, which is a new product and a new company that's developing essentially an AI conversation partner for young people to help coach them through relationship questions and uh, uncertainties and insecurities that they may be grappling with. And the goal being to help young people build up their ability to connect more deeply with other people out in the world, right? So this is kind of their tool or something in their toolkit that can help them to approach those relationships in a more effective way and build deeper connection. So that's one that comes to mind. I think that's an absolutely wonderful team, and they're approaching their development in a really human-centered, heart-centered, ethical way, which is great. There are certainly also, I think, there's some folks, communities in maybe more of the traditional kind of mental health space that I think are creating great conversation about our shared experience of mental health. So one that just comes to mind off the top is Made of Millions. This is, they have a strong social presence and I do lots of kind of communications and content around mental health, particularly, I think, helping to demystify and destigmatize some experiences of more, um, so for example, like obsessive compulsive disorder and kind of more stigmatized mental health disorders. This is a group that really helps to humanize and destigmatize that. One that always goes in that category for me is NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness. They have local chapters all over the US. They do lots of in-person events, walks, meetups, support groups, peer groups. Again, really focused on providing and building a sense of community around the experience of mental health. I think what I'd love to see, and I think we are seeing this to some extent, like this is happening, but I think more conversation about our shared universal experience of mental and emotional health is net positive, right? So really allowing that to be just as much a conversation as my nutrition or my sleep tracking or getting out for my daily walk, like allowing mental and emotional health to be part of the conversation just creates a sense of safety and a sense of community around that. Um, which is wonderful. I mean, it's all kind of net positive.
Definitely. Yeah, we're not meant to go through these things alone. And when we do,
Mm.
it can be a lot more daunting and difficult. So fantastic to hear about those. And I'm sure, as you said, there's going to be a lot more of these popping up as I think the whole agenda on and conversation on technology and AI has maybe woken us up a little to the idea that actually we need to be more proactive in how we interact human to human, because if we're not careful and not proactive about it, we you know can actually go days sometimes where you haven't really had too much of a meaningful interaction with many people. So yeah,
Yeah.
these kind of tools that help people do that more proactively are going to have a great impact in the near future for sure. I think
Mhm.
also a really interesting challenge for those kind of companies taking on social health and social connection is what kind of outcomes they could possibly measure to define success for them. And I know that's been a huge part of your work over the years, really having those evidence-based metrics and clear outcomes to aim for. So do you have any ideas of what would be some good outcome metrics or measures in social health or more broadly in the MindTech sphere itself?
Well, it's such a good question. I think um, historically, right, we've focused on these very individual level measures, which makes a ton of sense when, um, just to kind of like zoom out to the systems level for a second. For most of these digital mental health, for example, interventions, um, the vast majority are focused on a more clinical population, and they're particularly focused on seeking some sort of reimbursement for helping to address those concerns. So in that sort of an environment, we have a system that requires some quantified measurement of those disordered presentations and seeing some alleviation of symptoms. So that leads us all to the same place, right? So every digital mental health company is working on building in measurement of depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, sometimes maybe quality of life scales or measures, or kind of more cross-cutting evidence-based, validated measures for particular types of diseases, disorders. So I'd say that's the baseline state in the industry is, and it makes perfect sense to do it this way in that sort of a system, is that we're trying to measure the outcomes that are going to be consistent with what's required for reimbursement from the entities that reimburse for mental health care and support. That obviously leaves a lot on the table, right? That's not being measured because it's not going to be accretive to that outcome that the company needs. So this is where there's a bit of a conflict, right? And like, where do these more expansive, more socially oriented, more relational types of interventions, where do those fit into the current system? Who is willing to pay for them? Are they, if these are commercial endeavors, then that's a pretty important question, right? So I think we're unfortunately a ways off from a system or a particularly in this country, a healthcare system that would be readily paying for any sort of kind of general population support or tool that's about promoting relational health or social health, regardless of all the great predictors and great impacts of that. I think that's not aligned with the way that payers invest in these sorts of solutions. So then that leaves us with, if it's going to be individual consumers who might seek a solution like this, we have to think about what are the outcomes that really matter to them, and how do we start to build evidence that we can help people achieve those outcomes. I think it's going to lead us down a different road than certainly there's some validated measures, I'm sure, that get at these sorts of outcomes, but is that what a consumer is most interested in? I don't know. I think that's where there's kind of some fun, juicy work to do, is to say, how do we, if we're building kind of a newer paradigm, a newer way of thinking about mental health, and we're building that directly for people who would use it, or maybe we're going to schools, or maybe we're going to community organizations, or going to different sort of like commercial or funding environments that aren't traditional payers of healthcare. That means that we've got some work to do to figure out what are the outcomes that are really important and meaningful and that matter. And then how do we measure those? How do we actually collect those effectively and accurately in a user-friendly way at scale? In the very early days of digital mental health, we were asking those same questions, but we were asking them about how are we going to digitize and administer and deliver these like individual symptom rating scales at scale. We figured that one out. That feels like every company can do that now, right? And there's some improvements on the margin about how we report that and package it up and share it with the right customer. But now we're kind of at the frontier of a new set of questions. How do we understand what matters to people about their sense of belonging, their sense of community, the sense of their health of their relationships? How much do those things matter to them? Is that even the way in? Is that the way that people think about the outcome that they want to change, or the goal that they want to achieve? And then when we understand that better, okay, now how do we collect that, either by asking you about it, which can we pick up signals passively about it from other things in your life or other devices that you have? That'd be cool. I don't know if we could do that or not. But then we start to think about, like, feasibility wise, how would we actually collect that and provide that information back to you in a way that matters to you, either matters to compel purchase, to keep you engaged in this sort of intervention, or for some other reason that we need to discover more. But I think that's what's fun about being at the kind of front edge of a new paradigm, is that we actually have to think all the way through that system to say, what do we need to be able to measure, and who do we need to show it to, and what's the purpose of that, and what do we hope happens as a result, and like really think about the strategy of that end to end.
Definitely. It's interesting with mental health outcomes in particular because there isn't really an end point. It's kind of like with mental health, it's a way of living, right? It's a constant process and a practice to keep one's mind joyful, healthy, and unburdened from stress and distraction. And that presents a whole different approach to outcomes compared to other problems that need to be solved, which may have a very clear endpoint, right? Especially in the more physical health domain. And
Mhm.
just to kind of bring our wonderful conversation to a close here, I think it would be really interesting to have a think about, because this space really, I think, also needs a lot more flexibility and variability in its business model and the way it monetizes these kinds of mental health interventions. So perhaps, I could throw it out there. What do you think? Do you think there could be a way to kind of have even the payment models linked with outcomes in mental health in any way?
Absolutely. I mean, can it be done? Yes, 100% it can be done. Value-based reimbursement or outcomes-based payment in a mental and behavioral health context has happened. It's been it's been known to happen. It is doable. Um, there's many systemic reasons why we don't see much of that adoption at scale. Um, some of which have to do with the way that, even if we think about kind of commercial payers of healthcare in the US, how their book of business is actually set up. Savings in one area of behavioral health, difficult to link to other areas of investment. So we don't need to even get into all of those details, but suffice to say, there are some sticky, long-standing logistical reasons why we
Mm,
don't see a lot of adoption of that. And then I think there's more interesting reasons as well. Scaling the delivery of evidence-based mental health intervention has been much harder, I think, than a lot of people realize. The way that mental health care is delivered typically in the community is often unrelated to evidence-based best practice. And so the idea that you would, as a provider of mental health care, go at risk or take on, responsibility to say, I'm going to deliver X type of outcome in X type of time frame for a single bundled payment or a single episode of care payment. If you're not if you're not well trained in how to deliver care that would actually achieve those sorts of outcomes in that time frame, it's a pretty tall order to even think about structuring care in that way. So I think it all ties together what we were talking about too, that I think this is a particular way of thinking about mental health treatment. It's the way I was trained as well, that I was trained in evidence-based practice. I was trained to think about episodes of care and trained to think about the delivery of psychotherapy as at least a time limited kind of phase of treatment, right? So there should be X number of sessions where we're initially focused and we're trying to achieve some sort of degree of change in that first period of time, right? And maybe we continue on with different phases of treatment after that. Um, but that's really, I was trained very much to think in that way, to say we're following a particular type of intervention and we're trying to achieve a certain amount of improvement in a certain amount of time. Now that lends itself really nicely to value-based reimbursement models in behavioral health care. If you can get yourself into a delivery environment where there's going to be some opportunity to pay for care in that way. Some of the digital mental health companies have gone really hard in this direction. Lyra, for example, is really focused on quality of care, quality outcomes, and being able to provide speed to outcome. And so they're clearly aligning their messaging towards more value-based reimbursement environments, to the extent that, certainly self-insured employers might be interested in that. Certain types of integrated payers might be interested in that. But when we think about scaling that and expanding that throughout the country, or we'll leave aside even like a global expansion of that approach, a lot of pieces of the puzzle need to change. Payers need to be set up in order to measure those outcomes and actually reimburse appropriately and accordingly for the types of outcomes that will be delivered by professionals in that environment. Professionals have to be trained to deliver care that's that's designed to be able to be held accountable to outcome. Measurement-based care and using measurement in care has to be standard practice, has to be happening across the board, which we're super far from today. And these are all those pieces of the puzzle are, there's digital mental health companies that focus on individual elements. So I think there's hope that as those pieces get stronger and as we see more pilot implementation systems that are working well, that are kind of a win-win across the board, patients getting what they need, providers able to provide great care and get reimbursed appropriately, and the payers able to kind of contain their spend with behavioral health and get the outcomes that justify that investment. As we see some of those successes and wins, the hope would be that we're able to actually replicate that and scale it using the tools that have been developed across the board. But I think it's important for people to know that we're a long way from that today. Like, there is a lot of great work to be done in this space to help it be even a remote possibility that as you seek mental health care anywhere in this country, you could have access to evidence-based care, the best possible types of treatment to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for, that can be covered by your insurance if you have insurance in this country, which is not a guarantee, and that there won't be significant barriers to being able to receive care in that way. I mean, that is ultimately, that's the goal, right, of behavioral health innovation. That's what we want to see be possible for everyone. And we've got work to do. There's plenty of work for everyone to do in this space because we've got some serious improvement to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating how even before the product can be innovated, the whole payment infrastructure and the healthcare system needs innovation to actually facilitate the right kind of product to work properly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big challenge for startups and anyone building products in this space, because you want to disrupt with the right kind of product that is measured in the right way and is aligned with it in its business model with those outcomes. But you need the system that it works on top of to really be in line with that. And I wonder how that will be, how that will evolve over the years. It will be a bit of a dance, I think, maybe with the
Mm-hmm.
innovation in technology, really trying to guide the innovation in the systems and the payments to to work with it. But yeah, as you said, loads of work to be done, and something that is a very worthwhile problem to be working on as well. So Claire, it has
Absolutely.
been an absolute pleasure to learn about all of the work that you continue to do in rapidly expanding access to high quality mental health interventions. Of course, with the power of technology driving it. And that's why it's really totally aligned with everything that we do here on the MindTech podcast. So really appreciate you being with us today.
Such a pleasure. I mean, and really fun to explore all these different avenues with you. Really great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. So for everyone listening, how can people support and follow your work?
Yes, I think the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm Clare Kennedy Purvis on LinkedIn. You can also find out about the work that we do to support women clinicians and scientists in digital health through our organization, Well, and our website is well-women.org. And from there, you can find out about certainly how to connect and get to know lots of other women healthcare professionals interested in this space. And you can also find out about some of the unique programming that we offer to help women clinicians and scientists become great business leaders in the startup ecosystem. So those are probably the best places to find out about us. I do have a personal website, clarepurvis.com. It's not totally up to date, so come find me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to start. You can always connect with me and shoot me a note there.
And all of those details and links will be in the description, so all neatly in one place for you guys to check all that out. One last thing from me, just like Headspace, every startup that has featured on MindTech is solving a mental health problem with a technology-enabled solution. And to get a full picture of all the problems that these startups are working on and all the solutions that they're offering, you can click on the link in the description to be emailed access to the MindTech Matrix, which is the first and only visual map of mental health problems on one axis and startup-led solutions on the other. You'll also be updated whenever there's a new episode and get early access to testing out some of the cool products discussed on the podcast. Everything you need is in the description. Until next time, thanks everyone.